From a closet, also known as the Jim McCarthy Voiceovers World Headquarters Studio, this is the JMVO Weekly Primer. Please subscribe, rate, and comment via jimmccarthyvoiceovers.com/podcast. Yes, this is the JMVO Weekly Primer, the podcast to listen to if you want to marinate your mind in good stuff, because we are always surrounded these days, seemingly, by negativity. And as business owners, entrepreneurs, salespeople, business professionals, it's kind of the last thing we need to get mired in the negativity. And that's what this podcast is for. We try to keep it uplifting, positive, helpful, and enlightening to a certain extent. Of course, the primer is brought to you by Big Dot Lighting and Electrical here in Nashville and Middle Tennessee. Good news, the energy efficiency tax credit has been renewed, so if you're thinking about doing some sort of an energy efficiency project or upgrade, now is a good time to do it, because you can get a minimum, or you can be eligible for a minimum of 60 cents per square foot to convert to energy efficiency measures in your building. If you manage one, if you own a building, it's a really good idea. You can get anywhere from $60 to $1.80 per square foot on certain types of energy efficiency. Of course, LED lighting being our specialty. So check us out at bigdotlighting.com, and on with the show. We are in the closet today. Sometimes I've been taking the show on the road and doing it remotely out of the closet, but hey, we're back in the closet, and that's a good thing. And today my guest is somebody who caught my attention about 2 weeks ago, and immediately liked the guy because he and I think along the same lines. He's got a storied career in radio, much like myself. And, honestly, haven't done much background research on him until I got on the phone with him just now, and we started finding out a little bit more. Turns out he bought his own radio station, which I think is pretty cool, because it's something that, if you're really a radio person and you want to stay engaged in the format and in the platform, and you don't want to deal with the boneheads that are running some of these companies these days, then why not go out and buy your own and prove to the world how it's done. And my guest is Matt, I hope I don't screw up his last name, Matt Dubiel.
Ooh.
Did I get it?
I like it. Yeah, you said it like family. I appreciate that.
Dubiel. That's the way to do it, right?
If you sat there with my family, you'll hear four people pronounce it four different ways, but it's either, like, we say Dubiel.
Dubiel. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a voiceover guy too, so you got to make sure that we say the right thing, and I give you
we'll send it to you phonetically.
Yeah. Whatever that means. So, man, tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, the video that you put up was pretty much saying a lot about the hard truths of the people who recently were let go from the iHeartMedia debacle. And they let about 10% of their workforce go. Didn't seem to be involving too many executive positions or sales positions or management, but a lot of programming, production, on air, the people who actually go out and create the radio quote unquote magic, because they figure they can use the VR, virtual reality type stuff for AI. That's what it is. And using their quote excellence centers to conjure up music and try and be live and local. I know that here in Nashville, our afternoon guy at one of the stations got booted, and now we got a guy who voice tracks out of Asheville, North Carolina, for, a market that's a large to major market. So a lot of changes afoot in the radio industry, and you spoke a lot to that. Can we recover that video in a nutshell and just kind of go over it?
Yeah, you and I have both been in this business a while. I got in the mid-'90s, and I remember bumping into somebody that was one of my instructors at, in a broadcasting course of some sort, and we were working at the same radio station together, and he came in and he was singing the praises of Doomsday or Chicken Little, really not the praises. The sky is falling. Oh my God, you don't know. Clear Channel's going to do this. It's the end of the world. And I remember being like, screw you, man. Like, I'm young and I'm full of energy, and you're coming in here and you're telling me that this is the end and I should get out. And I thought, what a bogus way to go about it.
Yep.
And dude, I mean, that was at the end. That was like 1999.
Yeah.
Like, So it was ending in 1999. So there's one thing that's for certain, and that is it's not over, and it's not going to be over anytime soon. We all know that. Now, the flip side of that is it's changed. It's very different. And this new world has sort of been creeping up on us for a while. So anybody that's maintained a job or a standing in broadcasting, you've been in the jacuzzi and they've been turning up the heat on the jacuzzi, and you didn't realize maybe that, holy cow, you got to get out because it's too hot. And so some of your contemporaries got out and they got into voiceovers, or they diversified, or they got their real estate license, or they found ways to figure out how to use their radio talents to make money or to make hay in other industries.
Yeah.
And then some of us went, how am I going to do it in the industry that I'm in? I'm going to stay here, but I'm going to maybe go into sales or promotions or management or whatever it is. And so I was kind of speaking to the people, God bless you, that stayed in radio as talent and didn't sort of adjust with the times. And, when you get laid off, it's the worst time to hear it. But that pain is something that you need to like smack you in the face and go, oh my gosh, let me do it differently next time. And for the people that are still in radio, that are kind of hanging on for dear life, this is your wake-up call to start doing things that you'll wish you had done after you got fired.
The last round of layoffs that iHeart did, yeah.
You're looking at your friends and your contemporaries, and you're going, oh man, I made it. I stuck around. Well, you're next.
Yeah.
And you need to start now doing the things that they wish they had done. The best thing you can do if you have a job in radio is to talk to the people who got laid off and who are out there trying to figure it out, and ask them what they wish they would have done 6 months before they got laid off, a year before they got laid off, etc. That's what they should all be doing.
And that's one of the things that I've been speaking to a lot of my, contemporaries that I worked with in the business. I'm like, you have a massive platform here to build a social media following, a personal brand, if you will. Why not build it? Because if all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out from underneath you, and I'm sorry, working for this company, it's like I equated it to the line from the movie Clerks, where they were talking about the contractors who were building the Death Star. And they were saying, dude, you have to understand the risk that you're taking when you are building something like this. Okay. If you get killed building it, you can't really be upset about it because you're building the Death Star. Okay. You're working for a company like this that has time and time and time again flushed out people over and over and over again. What did you expect? You know what I mean? It's like
yes.
Contractor on the Death Star.
Another great example, that's a really solid one. Another great one is thinking about the people that drive for Uber, for example. Uber is, it's a great side hustle. Great. Well, Uber's mission is to have driverless cars.
Right.
So all of you people that are driving for Uber, yes, there's a window of time here where you're going to make some money on your side hustle, but you have to know that you're training the GPS and the algo and the AI and everything else to someday replace you. And if you're okay with that, that's totally cool. But you got to know that your time to take that opportunity is going to be limited. Right. And the same goes for radio. And to me, by the way, the radio companies should want you to do everything that you should be doing that's in your best interests. It's also in their best interest. So they have all these, webinars and all of these, talks and these conventions and conclaves for broadcasters where they bring in people like Gary Vee spoke at the radio event last year. They want people to say, what should we be doing?
Yeah.
And they say they're going to do it. And the big companies will act like they know what they're doing. And then they won't really do it. They'll just tell you like, well, you should post on Facebook a couple of times, and you should, post over here a couple of times, and you should tweet. And I have friends that are in the business and they're like, well, I'm on social media, because they want us to be on social media at work. Well, they don't want you to be on social media. They don't want you, and you shouldn't want to be on it. You should be using it to build an audience, and you should be entertaining and informing in those areas the same way you do on the air, or in different ways for the medium to build a big following. And your power exists when you're on the station with those big call letters. I mean, gosh, think about it. Think of these YouTubers that have created a following without being on WLS or do some radio station or some TV station. They built PewDiePie. 45 million people follow this guy.
That's what I was going to ask.
Without a radio station.
What's the average Cume these days for a top 10 radio station in any market? Average Cume.
I mean, so we have some Cume stations in Chicago that Cume 1 million people, they say, if you believe those numbers. Right. But, I mean, it's still nowhere near what the top social media influencers are cuming on their Instagram feed or their Twitter feed. And here's the other thing, you know, TikTok is very big. A lot of influencers are on TikTok. A lot of kids are on TikTok. And I'm looking at TikTok going like, wait a minute, why didn't iHeart or Entercom or Cumulus, why didn't they develop TikTok? Who has the most amount of talent that's good in 8 seconds to 60 seconds? Oh, radio people are really good between 8 seconds and 60 seconds. So radio could have launched and created that app. Now, let's not cry about it and sit here and ruminate about what could have happened with radio. Fine if those companies didn't come up with the idea, but radio people get on that app and dominate now because you are better at creating great content that's 8 seconds to 60 seconds long if you're a music jockey than anyone on the planet.
And it's the thing is that they're creating the content ongoing every day as it is. Just repurpose it.
Well, and you're already known. So if you're the afternoon jock, whether it's, I mean, it could even be you're in Dubuque, Iowa, you're in Rockford, you're in Paducah, wherever. You don't have to be in a major market, but now you can bring people behind the scenes and show them what the studio looks like and chat with them off the air in between songs. And I saw the video that you're talking about where I kind of talked about, hey, you know, look out, people, it's coming. There were some people in the business that commented that some friends of mine shared, and some of their comments were like, you know, how do I have time for this? And you're telling me that I got to be on 5 different platforms and I got to do this and that. It's like, if you're a music jock, what are you doing while the song's playing?
Yeah, the computer's playing. Minutes? You're not pulling music or anything.
Yeah, you have time. And if you have time to post, this is the ultimate example. In you talked about a movie, The Clerks, and the example of the Death Star. There's the Tom Sawyer story. Tom Sawyer is notorious for getting his friends to paint the fence for them. He tricks them into thinking that painting the fence is fun, and then Tom Sawyer thereby does not have to paint the fence. Yeah. And then he gets it to the point where kids are bringing him lollipops and treats and rewards in order for him to let them paint the fence. Well, guess what? That's all of us on social media. Mm-hmm. We're all in there commenting and building Zuckerberg's, dynasty. Mm-hmm. And you can't tell me that you don't have time to then create the content that will get you the attention. I'm saying flip it and use that to bring people towards you. Then you get fired from your job, your radio job. You bring people with you. You go to the next employer. You go to the other owner across the street and you say, hey, I got 10,000 fans that are going to come with me. All I got to do is tweet to them that I'm moving over to your radio station, and I bring my listeners with me.
I've taken my flag out of that, and I'm planting it over here. That's basically what they're saying.
Everybody that was on the air for the last 5 years had been doing that. And really, really smart broadcasters that have built their own infrastructure that a lot of us look up to, like a Ryan Seacrest or a Glenn Beck or whoever. Mm-hmm. Those guys have been able to leverage their radio play into those other things, and then the rest of us are sitting back going like, those guys are lucky. Yeah.
Was Joe Rogan lucky?
Right. There's another great example.
Right. I mean,
the biggest thing in radio is the guy that isn't a radio guy.
No, he's not a radio. He's a comedian. And he had a lot of energy and forward momentum creating that show. But even he said, he put it up the other day, it was 10 years in the making. It says 10 years ago, we started this podcast and everybody laughed. He says for the first couple of years, but we kept on going. I mean, he's over 1,000 episodes in, and I think they've got 19, I mean, maybe I'm way off. Maybe it's 19 a month, or maybe it is 19 a month. 19 million downloads a month. Oh my gosh. There are radio stations and television. There are radio networks that would kill for a number like that.
You could add up all of the people that go to maybe all the websites that Cumulus has or iHeart has, and they're not getting that kind of traffic. Yeah. And that kind of time spent listening. This is what I love about the Joe Rogan show. It reminds me of when the year that the Mini Cooper came out and the Hummer were out. both the largest car and the smallest car were the top most popular cars. And the same thing goes like in podcasting and stuff. You'll have people that be like, well, the average podcast should be 20 minutes because that's the length of the commute.
Right.
And it's like, no, man, the podcast length should be what's good.
Yeah.
So Joe Rogan can do a 3 or 4 hour monster podcast and people are listening to it partially because they chop up chunks, put it out there, and those act as promos. I mean, here again, radio people, you know how to do this stuff better from Jump Street than maybe Joe and Jamie did in the beginning. Joe and Jamie had to figure it out. They had to learn all the things that all the radio people already knew. Like the power of running a promo and a recycler and all this stuff. These guys are running recyclers. They're doing stunts. Watch some of the top YouTubers. They're doing old radio stunts from like the 80s and 90s where, you know, when a doper guy has like, you got to keep your hand on the car and the last person with their hand on the car wins it. That's stuff that they were doing, you know, like on KRP in the 80s or the 70s and stuff.
What a doodle. So
it's the opportunity is boundless.
It is, and there's, you know, you can repurpose a lot of that. It makes a lot of what we're talking about makes me think about something called the law of diffusion of innovation, and it's a curve, and I'll put it up here if I don't know if you can see it. And basically, it says, you know, in the beginning, you know, 2.5% are considered the innovators. The earlier adopters then ramp up to 13.5%. The tipping point happens right about at the end of that. Early majority at 34%, the crest of the wave, then the bell curve actually happens right around there, late majority, and then the laggards. So there's always that kind of an effect. But I mean, radio especially, they should have been way ahead of this because they're so married to the medium. And I just had this conversation with somebody yesterday. I said, and she was actually in sales. And I said, you know, she says, how hard it is to get local direct business these days. I said, well, you know, they've got the money. You know, what are you charging per spot now? And we talked a little bit about that, and the rate has certainly come down. I said, have you ever thought about reaching out and partnering with some of these influencers that are local to Nashville? And that we have them. You know, we've got people with 350, 400,000 followers on Instagram. And I'm going, she says, well, you know, that's just not part of the offerings that they have at the company. And I'm going, okay, what about you? Why don't you innovate that and go and trailblaze? And, you know, you got to make a living. If this works and you can set it up as a cross promotion with an Instagram influencer and a local powerhouse radio station, what's the harm in asking? Because if all of a sudden you come to the manager and say, listen, I've got this idea. It seems like there's something here we could use. How can we price this? You know? And
I think the salespeople, you know, the radio talent for sure works for the radio station. There's no question. But the radio salespeople, a lot of them behave as though they work for the station. And they all, the good ones, the ones that have been around, know they really work for their clients. Their clients are their bosses. So if they can go get great, like I wish that more local sellers would think of themselves as an agency instead of as a seller for that radio station. Yeah, you want to keep your job. Yeah, you want, you know, whatever iHeart or Intercom or whoever to be happy with your performance as a sales rep, but they should be thinking of themselves as an advertising agency, and they need to find the best way to get the furniture store more attention, which leads to more clients. And if that is a combination of local radio and some influencer stuff or influencers on the radio, that's absolutely what they should be doing. And the radio station isn't going to care as long as they keep getting revenue. And the best way to get the radio station revenue is to serve that furniture store. So I don't know that any of them should be reluctant to do it, but it's one of those things where it takes time for them to realize that that's really the business that they're in. You know, over the last 15 or 20 years specifically, there's been a talk in radio about a drought of talent. And there definitely has been somewhat, although the real drought of talent that I've experienced is the sales drought. There's sellers that have gotten very lazy in being list sellers in big markets or even list sellers in medium markets where they get a list, they call on the list. And the art of being a direct seller and building those relationships, those people kind of moved into the agencies. And I'll tell you what, you go online and you'll see agencies, like social digital marketing agencies, are booming right now. And it's another area where you go like, well, why aren't these radio salespeople capitalizing on this? Why is some kid that's 18 years old building a social media marketing agency when he doesn't really understand it at the level that these local sellers do? They know these businesses, they know these markets, so they should be kind of expanding that way.
Yeah, and you see a lot of that kind of happening in other industries as well. One of the things that I preach, my life after radio consisted of going into the car business for several years, and it was a tremendous education, and I talk about it a lot. One of the things that I tell a lot of my people that I worked with in that business, because that business can be fickle as well. They're very similar, interestingly enough, radio and then the automotive industry. And I found a lot of similarities to them. But, because a lot of the salespeople are, in a sense, the on-air talent in the dealership, if that makes sense.
For sure.
And I said, if you become a dealership within a dealership, which is very much possible, there are people that actually bill enough and have such a customer base that they need a staff to keep up with the demand, and they're selling 2 or 3 cars a day. It's just completely stupefying. Mm-hmm. And some of them build up such a social presence that, you become a threat that if you were to leave, you pull out that flag and now I'm over here, and where the companies have to figure out the legalities and the non-competes and all that stuff to prevent that from happening. But it gives you leverage. Ultimately, over time, it gives you tremendous leverage. There's a guy, write this name down, Mike Davenport, and they call him the Louisville Chevy dude. Okay, he's got, I think last check that I looked at him, he's a Chevy salesman out of Louisville, Kentucky, who became the leading expert in Corvettes. And he's one of the go-to guys for all things Corvette. And really started putting the hammer down about 5 years ago to build himself a massive social following. And I want to say the last check, he had 150,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Imagine, if I owned a car dealership, I'd want as many of those guys and girls as possible. And so you can apply that same mentality to a radio station. Like if I were an iHeart company or Cumulus.
I'm sorry, 212,000.
Yeah, so come on, think about that. Like a guy that sells cars, everybody that watches that guy, I'm sure goes, well, I bet you his ulterior motive is to sell me a car, and they watch him anyway and they follow him anyway. So he's shattering all sorts of stuff. But imagine if you're the general manager or the program director at whatever radio station, or you're the floor man. We have these computer stores in Chicago, and they're called Micro Center. Do you have Micro Center in Nashville?
No,
it's like a store for nerds. Like you could get RAM for your computer. You could build a gaming computer. It's like a car dealership, but for computer stuff.
Really?
Like what Best Buy used to be. A really cool store. And I just think every time I go in there, just like a car dealership, like imagine if every person that was a seller, that was a specialist, fired up their phone and went live and showed you how you could do cool stuff to your car or cool stuff to your computer, or get faster, boot up times or whatever it is, or gaming or whatever. If they did that more often, they would be untouchable. And so the same goes for talent. The guy at the car dealership is a double whammy, because it's like you said, he's like the radio, he's like the morning guy, but he's also like the star sales rep.
Yeah.
He's a double threat, maybe a triple threat. I got to imagine there's car dealers that are going like, hey man, come over here. And he's probably thinking of himself, or he will start to think of himself more as an agency in his own right, where, hey, I got car buyers. I can bring my buyers anywhere. I can bring my audience anywhere.
And that's the thing, is he is monetizing not only the primary source of his income is selling cars, but he's got merch, he's got T-shirts, he's got a ton of stuff like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he's
like, what does the merch say? Like,
it's basically his whole thing is car buying doesn't have to suck, and that's his thing. That's his slogan. I believe he trademarked it.
That's cool.
And he got the YouTube certification and all that stuff. And he, Chevrolet honestly should be like from corporate should be looking into him as well. But I don't know what the story is there. But if you ever need a I don't know if you have a podcast, but I mean, he would be a great guest because I mean, he ties into a lot of what we're talking about. And for those of you who are listening that are in an industry that's fickle, okay, that you have no idea if you're going to be employed tomorrow, this can be applied to just about pretty much anything, especially in the sales side of things. Build yourself a personality, create leverage. It's one of the best things you can possibly do. One of the things that I've been hitting up, even with the people that I've been talking, I've had two friends of mine that recently lost their gigs in radio. And one of whom, she and I talked, and she was really just trying to figure out, okay, where do I go now? I just don't know what's going to happen. And I kind of squared her away and said, listen, do you understand your equity in doing morning radio is tremendously useful when it comes to the millions of podcasters out there? Do you know how much equity you bring to the table? You can be a coach tomorrow, and you can back it up.
A lot of people are just not used to the amount of personal responsibility and influence they have on their own lives and their own careers. And it's not their fault really, because the old way was you needed to make a good impression on your boss, or you needed to make a good impression on somebody that made a decision, dress for the job you want, not the one you got, and all that sort of stuff. And today you can be you and put yourself out there and attract people that are like you and repel maybe people that don't like you or whatever.
That's okay.
But it gives you a tremendous amount of freedom. And you said if you're in an industry where it's contracting, I believe that's going to be damn near every industry. As every minute passes, every industry is going to continue to contract in some way or another because they want to be efficient. They have to be efficient. And so even people that sell cars, they're going to get rid of the bottom 3% of the car sellers that aren't carrying it.
Right.
So you got to make a decision. Do you want to be in the top or do you want to be in the bottom? The people at the top are going to get fed more. And how can you be at the top? Well, everybody has a TV and a radio studio in their pocket. Everyone has a printing press in their pocket, and it's a game changer. You just got to start figuring out how to use it for yourself. And boy, that's great news for everybody that doesn't work in radio. It's also great news for people that are in radio or newspapers or television, because you should have a leg up given your skill set and your experience. You just were kind of lulled into this sleep thinking that you weren't good enough, or that you're just a radio person, or you're just a newspaper person. And it's like, no, think of all the things you know how to do.
Yeah.
Event management. I mean, people that have done remotes, people that have done morning shows, like the scope of their expertise and experience is astounding. Somebody just needs to remind them how great they are.
And they really don't think they bring much to the table. And if anything, you're right. That's some of the conversations that I have. I mean, with both of those people that I talked to, was you really have, you are so inside of your own bottle, you just have no idea what the label says. And I've experienced life out of radio, life after radio, and it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And your experience has been similar to that, I would imagine. Talk a little bit about that.
It has been a little bit. One of the things. So when I got started in radio, I wanted to be, the morning guy, like a lot of us, right? Like you get in, you're like, no, I want to be like that morning guy. And the morning guy that I wanted to be like was the guy, to me, who's the best ever in radio, bar none. And that's Jonathan Brandmeier. He owned the city of Chicago. People, it was a different time, but people here, he fabricated the soundtrack of the experience in Chicago in the 80s and in the 90s, and then reinvented a little bit even in the 2000s. And then he was syndicated and he was on in other places. But you get in and you're like, man, I didn't want to be him, but I wanted to be my version of that level of excellence.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get in and you're like, okay, I kind of thought, well, no, the PD is the guy you want to be, because the PD is the one that can hire and fire you, and you have more control. And then you get in a little further and it was like, oh no, the GM is the person to be. And then it was like, oh no, owning the station, that's where you need to be. And let me tell you something, the place to be is where you're at. The place to be is what you enjoy. The place to be is what makes your heart soar and your mind get excited and all of that stuff. It's never the other thing that you think it is.
Right.
And looking back at now where we are, in the world and what works. Owning a radio station and managing a radio station, the real thing, and you talk about direct sales and sellers and the challenges of all that, especially now, you have people, advertisers that are looking at, well, should I do Instagram? Should I do Facebook? Should I do YouTube? Should I do pay-per-click? Should I do podcast in-stream pre-roll? Should I do radio? And people kind of look at radio even worse now, like it keeps going lower and lower down the totem pole. And it's like, ooh, the original mechanism for radio, at least in Chicago, was WLS, which the call letter stood for the world's largest store. Mm-hmm. And that radio station was a mechanism for Sears and Roebuck to reach farmers, to give farmers programming that they would listen to, and then they would get the catalog and shop at Sears and buy Sears stuff. That is by far, by the way, it's what you're doing with your podcast. You're using your podcast to promote these other services, and you're your own advertiser in some ways. And I'm sure that you would take other advertising.
I have no idea what you're talking about, really.
Right, but it's the best way to create an audience of the kind of people that you want to reach. So they did that. And now it's coming full circle. I wish I had a car dealership.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had a car dealership, I would not waste any time trying to convince car dealers they should be advertising on WCKG. I would be like, you know what? You can't advertise. Now you just can't leave, like a Bronx Tale.
Yeah.
Now you just can't leave. Now you can't advertise here. We're only going to advertise my car dealership, and we're going to sell the crap out of whatever kind of car we sell, because I know we're reaching all these people, and all of them, at least for now and probably the next 15 years, drive. So while they all drive, while they all sleep in bed, I wish I had a bed store, a mattress store. You know, that to me is where it's at. And that's where there's an opportunity to marry your content with the advertising and sort of bake it in and reach the people that you wanted. And that's what radio did 100 years ago here in Chicago. So to me, that's what it's really about. And it's hard to kind of juggle all that stuff, but look at all of the things that you do to put this together. You know, for the guy that was commenting about my video and saying, well, how can we as radio people do all this stuff? And like, what am I supposed to do? Tweet and Facebook and YouTube and all this other crap?
Yes.
You're doing it. Yeah. The answer is yes. What else are you doing with your time? And it's fun and you're enjoying it, right? I mean, like you enjoy putting this thing together and doing all the other things that go with it. You're doing all sorts of stuff. In fact, I'm looking at your thing and I'm going like, okay, how does this all fold together? He does a podcast. He's got, what's the lighting? That's kind of the out of left field curveball that I own half of an electrical and lighting company. So that's just something that was me saying yes to everything. The client is industrial facility managers, building owners, for the lighting side, because we do the LED conversions. And the electrical side is general contractors, design builders, homeowners who need something fixed, that kind of stuff. Okay, so when I saw it, I thought maybe you would do the like really cool LED Christmas lights that are synced to music and stuff like that. So I thought that was. So
it's all commercial, industrial stuff.
Got it. Okay. And so you find a way to do that, to do voiceover. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that to some degree you're your own engineer from time to time.
Yep. Like I'm acting like it now.
Well, for sure that way, but I'm saying like when you were troubleshooting or when you were building that studio and when you were putting things together, like you didn't have the team from Entercom come in and build the studio for you.
No. It was all me.
Right. Yeah.
Years of trial and error.
This is what life is about, guys. Like people that are like, how do I do it all? You just do it. You don't have to do it all at once, but you start, you take one step forward, and then you keep going and you keep figuring it out. I mean, what else are you going to do? Just sit there in the studio and hope that somebody keeps paying you to talk in between records?
Yes.
When, I mean, like, holy smokes. Not to mention the fact that what is your opportunity for growth? Like, what is the best thing that you hope could happen?
Yeah.
Are you going to have the opportunity to become the next, Ryan Seacrest or Wolfman Jack or Dick Clark? Or like, I don't think there's ever going to be another one of those sort of radio music superstars ever again.
The thing we're seeing it unfold and it's happening on podcasts. You're seeing the personalities start to emerge. like we're talking about on TikTok. TikTok especially, there are some, housewives that have 130,000 followers that are simply just saying, hey, I've got a rack and I'm going to put them in front of a camera and I'm going to dance and do all this other stuff. And, God knows who's their audience is, but it's happening. There's a girl on there. I want to say she's, probably college age, and she just gets on there and dance. She's got 22 million followers on TikTok. 22
seen her,
million.
And my boys and I have been fooling around with TikTok for like the last month or so and experimenting and just kind of messing around with it.
Yeah, me too.
And so Charlie is the girl you're talking about. She's 15. She's got 22 million followers.
Yeah.
She was just in a Super Bowl commercial. Now, here's the deal, though. Those kids on TikTok know who she is. Great.
Right.
Nobody else in my family yet, and they may at some point, but they may know who she is in the future, but they don't know who she is. Just like my boys and I just took a trip to New York, and I interviewed Gary Vaynerchuk.
I was going to bring that up.
You know who he is, right?
I do. Very well.
I know who he is. And I've known him, and I've not known him. I've known of him for a very long time, very, very early. But most people I know don't know they have no idea who he is yet. And so my point about the sort of ubiquitousness of like a Ryan Seacrest or a Dick Clark or even a Rush Limbaugh, news came out today that Rush has announced that he's got
lung cancer.
Lung cancer, which is, horrible to hear.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't believe that the upside for all of our brothers and sisters in radio is that they will someday get a chance to be the next whoever in radio. That chance is only going to come from them taking it up for themselves and leveraging it on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and then whatever other things develop as the time goes by. And if they and a podcast, via iTunes and all that stuff, if they don't do that, they for sure have almost zero chance of getting to that level. So if you're sitting there and you're at the studio of either Entercom or iHeart or Cumulus or Town Square or Alpha or some of these other large operators, you got to ask yourself, what do you have to lose by being the best content creator that you can be? And I have a feeling that what you're going to find is those companies will be begging for people like you in the future. And if they're not, their competitor will be. If Alpha doesn't like the fact that you're killing it on social media, then Town Square will, or whoever else will.
Well, it's the whole thing of becoming a person of interest so that they chase you. I produce a podcast with a good friend of mine, and we're kind of, coaching him to different levels in terms of being a personality. And he's an excellent host and personality. And he's also a drummer for a pretty major country artist. And we're putting that on, and, he keeps on talking. He's, well, maybe we'll get picked up. I said, why do we want to get picked up? Okay, we got to analyze that. If we're that good, let them come to us after a while and make an offer, and then we start negotiating. Because I have no qualms about bringing it onto a radio morning show or something like that, as long as we have our own terms, and we still do it the way that we do it. Because all of a sudden, you get into the confines of a morning show, you have confines, you've got limitations, you got to accommodate, spot breaks and learn how to get in and out of them and things of that nature. On the flip side of that, I run another podcast, or I executive produce another podcast that started out as a radio show, and the byproduct was the podcast. So we, it was brokered time on the weekends. We would go ahead and cut a couple of shows ahead of time. They would get aired on Sunday. My clients had a lot of heavy emphasis on the radio part of it, and I kept on telling them, no, that will be the launch pad, okay? This thing will become an online. People will be able to check it out on their terms. And that's the other thing, is the fact that, getting back to the length of podcasts like you were talking about, I love that question. Well, how long should it be? Well, how engaging are you? How entertaining are you? How compelling are you? That's the question, because if you can do 2 hours on a topic and it's good and entertaining and you have good guests, people are going to listen on their commute in, they're going to listen on their commute home, they're going to listen while they work out, and it's going to stop and pause on demand when they're able to listen. That's the other thing a lot of people miss about it. It's on-demand entertainment.
It's got to be sticky.
Yeah, it does.
One way or another. If it's sticky, and it's sticky for 5 minutes, cool. And if they're going to want another 5 minutes. And if it's sticky for 3 hours, like Rogan, you're like you said, it's going to be sticky. Another thing, I love what you're saying about not, it reminds me of the record business too, where people, even today, it shocks me when artists are like, oh, I'm just waiting for the label. And it's like, the label?
Yeah.
It's 2020, man.
Dude, put your own stuff out.
Right. And everybody that ever sees this or hears this or whatever should write this down if you're in radio. There are 13,000 radio stations in the United States of America. That's just the United States. Okay. That doesn't count Canada and obviously other countries, but let's focus on the US. The news of Rush Limbaugh today, terrible news, but consider the fact that most of these conservative talk stations, for example, are built around Rush Limbaugh. If Rush scales back and somebody else comes in, all those radio stations are going to rethink what they're doing and how they're doing it. Now, let's just say he's fine. Over the course of time, if you have a radio station in the United States of America, there's 13,000 of them. Your options are political talk, sports talk. That's it. Full service news, which is very expensive, but I'm talking as far as syndicated programming. And there's only one real provider as far as sports programming. The main one is ESPN. The secondary one is Fox Sports. Right. So WCKG is Fox Sports. Aside from that, if you're a manager, operator, market manager, salesman, whatever it is, 13,000 radio stations are going to be looking for shows. I promise you. And they're going to go to the internet and they're going to start looking at podcasters. It's why Pat McAfee, who was a podcaster and kind of leveraged Barstool Sports to become popular, Pat McAfee is doing a sports show for Westwood One. Ben Shapiro was doing his own thing, has a very big internet following, very big millennial following, leveraged that to get in with Westwood One on the political front. There's going to be more and more and more of that. And you people that have studios and ideas and content, if you make the content so that it can be put on the radio, if you're dropping F-bombs and talking about blue content, you're not going to be able to get it on the radio. Not that you should only want to get it on the radio either. I'm not saying that you should want that, but there's going to be an opportunity where they're going to need to take those shows and put them on the radio because they don't have anything else to pull from and they're not developing talent. They just don't have it.
Getting to your interview with Gary, what sort of things did you cover and how was he in person? Because I'm quite envious of you right now about that.
I decided to, I have 4 children. My oldest son, Anthony, is 17. My other son, my number 2 guy, Rocco, is 12. And I brought those guys with. My daughters stayed home and it was kind of a boys trip. And first time in New York, never been there before. I've traveled all over, but I've never really been to New York. And frankly, Chicago is, I still prefer it. It's prettier, sure. It's nicer. I love it much more. But Gary was very cool. We had a really nice conversation. I didn't expect the conversation to go down like it did. A lot changed in his schedule, so we ended up having it on the top floor of the Dominic Hotel in New York with a panoramic view of New York outside. And he had a group of business people there from New Zealand and Australia. And so we did this interview in front of all these people.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that was going to go down like that. I figured we would do it beforehand. And but we talked about a lot of things. We talked about iHeart. We talked about content. And we talked about, and one thing that I'll share, and it's on his podcast, although I'm going to rework the audio a little bit because it was done with lav mics and it's kind of tough to hear it. It's a little echoey.
Right.
But one of the things that he said that I don't agree with, I'm pretty much in agreement with damn near everything that we talked about from his perspective and what we discussed. But I asked him, he made a comment that he was going to be, he said, he's going to be, everyone will know him at some point. I kind of said to him the same thing we said earlier. I said, a lot of people don't know who he is, just like a lot of people don't know who Charlie on TikTok is, right?
Right.
And he said, oh, no, I fully agree. He said, but they will one day. And I said, okay. I typically try and get people like him to espouse the benefits of traditional media, radio, television, and the traditional rubber stamp of traditional media, because I think that people undervalue that so much, which is why I think it's so important for everybody that's still on the air to use those call letters or whatever it is to get people over to your social accounts, because you have something that all the other people that aren't on TV and radio don't have. And he kind of wrote it off and he said, no, I'm not going to need regular media. I won't need traditional media for everyone on the planet to know who I am.
Which is funny because he wanted to buy a Super Bowl commercial one year to basically tell everybody who he was.
Well, right. And in addition to that, just look at it from his client's perspective. He has an agency and their job is to get their clients on where their clients customers would be. Right. And that also includes Super Bowl ads. So the other thing is I got home and I saw him immediately sharing videos of him on the Steve Harvey Show.
Yeah,
now, Steve
traditional
Harvey
media
may not be on traditional media anymore, but I would classify that as traditional media, even if he's just on the internet, because you're leveraging that brand equity and that mainstream like rubber stamp. And that's what guys like, look at Mark Cuban. Before Mark Cuban was on the Shark Tank, most people didn't know who he was.
You kind of sort of heard about him.
Boom. Yeah, you heard of him, I heard of him. People in the media circles probably did. Another great example, if we go back even further, was remember when the Osbournes was on MTV?
Right.
I interviewed Kelly Osbourne before the Osbournes TV show came out. She came to the studios at the radio station. She was walking around. Nobody knew who she was. The next time I saw her, she was at Ozfest in Chicago. She couldn't walk 5 feet because having been on television on MTV was like, that was it. Now that'll change over time. But I really believe that guys like Gary and girls like Charlie and people that are internet famous and influencers on the web are going to, for the maybe next 5 to 10 years, still need that rubber stamp of traditional media. And whether they say it or not, they're getting it. Guys like Gary are getting it from other avenues. But all in all, really fun conversation, very kind, polite, gentle dude. Yesterday, he tweeted out.
Yeah, I saw that.
He took the time to look up whatever my Twitter handle was, like the kid or the guy that did the pre-announcement on his podcast, figured out how to pronounce my name, did it like family, just like you did. Yeah. Little things like that where you go like, oh man, these guys are all right.
And mind you, I didn't go out of my way to find out how to pronounce your last name. I just figured I'd wing it.
Yeah, well, and you as a professional voice stylist, you know how to take something on paper and turn it into the sound that it deserves. Oh my God,
you're giving me way too much credit here, man.
I got to ask you, is that a Sennheiser?
This is the Sennheiser 416. Yes, it's a shotgun. It is the preferred mic of a lot of voiceover artists out there, and I don't know why I'm talking like a puker right now, but hey.
Yeah, because I started it a little bit.
It's funny that you mentioned the traditional media thing, because not soon after you put out your video, I had just happened to come across one of Gary's old videos, probably from 2007, 2008, where he was taking to task Howard Stern, ripping to shreds some of these people that wanted to become influencers. Nobody knew what an influencer was back then. But, he's like, who's going to read your blog? And, Gary was taking him to task on the video. And I think you actually commented on it and agreed with it. And it's just kind of interesting how now Howard you see a lot of his stuff on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. He's kind of his team has embraced it, at least. And they're fun videos to watch.
Well, and people like us that are, I'm sure, I can't speak for you, but I'll give myself as an example. By the way, I would watch that, and I did watch that video of Gary talking about Howard, and I could take both sides. Like, I see Howard is right, in my opinion, on various points.
Yeah.
Okay. And I do agree with Howard and no disrespect to anybody who does a podcast. I love podcasting, and I have done a podcast, but people that podcast don't have radio shows.
Right.
I think that was one of his, and there was a time when that was even more true than it is today. And one of the things that really gets my goat is when radio people lose their jobs in major markets, and then they go like, well, yeah, I'm going to do a podcast. And then they only do it until they get their next call from that other radio station when they get paid to do a show someplace else. And now the podcast is done.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So I watch that video and I see Gary's points and I see Howard's points, and I agree with a lot of them on both sides, because there's a lot of good points there. Mm-hmm. I think Howard, like Gary says, is naturally got to push the perspective that leave it to the professionals. Nobody cares about you and your cats or whatever you're blogging about, or, whatever the deal is. at the same time, Howard has now lived through, I mean, Howard's been all over the place, right? Like, so there was a time when he was undressing lesbians in the studio, and now he kisses like, Ellen's butt, and he kisses Hollywood's butt, and he's a very different dude. He's also behind a paywall. So when you're behind a paywall, like, how do you promote your content? Yeah. He's missing out on everything that Joe Rogan is getting. So when you see those Joe Rogan clips of 4 minutes with him and Bill Maher, and that makes you go, oh, I want some more, you're not getting any of that with Howard. No. So you forget about him. So much of the news cycle used to be Howard did something, and now you can't hear it anymore, but you're going to read about it because somebody's writing about how terrible he is. Well, it works differently today. And now the content that you created a month ago lives infinitely longer on the internet. Look at those Jimmy Kimmel clips where they bring in the musician and then they sing the song. More people watch those Jimmy Kimmel clips of him doing a song with like Shakira and Justin Timberlake than watch the damn show when it's on television. Yeah. So it's like people better get with it. Otherwise, they're going to get left behind. And maybe Howard doesn't care if he gets left behind. I don't know.
I'm sure he's got his parachute has long been set up for quite a while.
Yeah, the dude's, I mean, yeah. But I mean, I think to some degree, what you said about him pushing on social media or his staff doing it, I think a lot of that has more to do with Sirius and the company, and then their purchase of Pandora being a bigger factor. And so you have Pandora, and boy, radio people pay attention again here. Like you have, I saw the news headline the other day where Entercom was beating their chest for buying 2 podcasting companies. Mm-hmm. And that was the big announcement about how Entercom is doubling down on radio. And I thought to myself, whoa, the headline is a company that should know how to do podcasts better than anybody, who's been producing podcasts for 100 years when they weren't called podcasts, just bought 2 other companies that specialize in podcasts. It's like McDonald's buying 2 hamburger companies and saying that they know what's going on. It's like, what in the world is happening here? Why are radio companies buying podcasting companies?
Now, what kind of companies were they? Were they producing podcasts in-house, or were they a network?
Either way. I think that they were both, but it's like either way. Have you ever spent any time listening to Adam Curry, the Podfather? The man who invented podcasting?
The Podfather. No, I mean, Adam Curry, I'm thinking of the VJ from MTV. Okay.
He's the guy that him and another guy named Dave Weiner invented podcasting. Mm-hmm. And Adam Curry, if you listen to him at all, he will say that you cannot monetize the network. And he started a podcasting network about 10 years ago, and it failed. And it failed for a lot of the same reasons that these other networks are probably going to fail. You can't go and spend $140 million and give it to the guy who started Gimlet. Yeah. And he's got 4 podcasts. And then you go like, well, what about the money for your network? What portion of the revenue do you get? And what portion of the revenue does Gimlet get? Well, they just spent $140 million on Gimlet, so they better show that it makes some more money again. So his argument is that you can't monetize the network. And so if they're either a network or a producer, shouldn't a radio company be able to produce podcasts better than a boutique podcast company?
Well, not only that, and the talent that are involved with it can just say, well, if I don't like what's going on, I'll just pull out of it and start something else over here. There's still that kind of leverage,
Yeah. There was just another announcement today about a radio show in Chicago that used to be on one AM radio station, and now they're going to be podcasting with the competing AM radio station. And I'm looking at it and I'm going like, what is the benefit to podcast with the radio station? Yeah. Like you don't need them. You get Libsyn, you put it on Stitcher and SoundCloud and iTunes and everywhere else. And
it's not hard.
Or you do what Joe Rogan did and you go on YouTube and then figure it out. And then once the horse gets out of the barn, you start going, all right, how do we ride this thing? Whoa.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that, not that I want to basically decry any question that comes up from, potential podcasters. But one of the things they talk about is, well, should I have a video portion of the podcast? Does it really a podcast at that point? Or is it more of a video? I'm like, does it matter? It's extra bandwidth. It's extra surface area for your podcast to be discovered. Why wouldn't you do video? Why wouldn't you just stick your camera up somewhere and videotape yourself doing your podcast? This way you have the video coverage and all that stuff. But that's a whole other topic. What I'm going to actually get into are the things that you think radio people, and I don't want my contemporaries in radio to think that I'm bagging on radio. I'm not. It's just looking at what's happening and seeing your surroundings like Matt and I are discussing, and seeing the writing on the wall. Or either build the foundations for your own personal brand moving forward and get some leverage. This way, if God forbid something does happen, all of your chips all your eggs aren't in the same basket. You've got them diversified. You've got leverage. Perfect case in point. The Chet Buchanan show out of Las Vegas. Worked with Chet back in the from 01 to 05. He's just simply taking their content breaks that they do live on the air, repurposing them every single day as a podcast. You know, they're not playing any music. They're talking about the different features, games that they play, caller interactions, and they're just simply taking what they do on the air and turning it into a podcast every single day. I think it's brilliant. Start there.
It's a great idea. You know, there's been a bunch of debates, especially when you go to these radio events, which is why I don't go to them anymore, where they all talk about, hey, here's what we're going to do. Yeah, man, the future, it's audio, it's ubiquity, HD radio. Blah. Yeah, it's like all they're doing is talking about garbage. Think about all the time they spent talking about HD radio and running promos for that crap. And then if they had spent that effort and that time, they could have made TikTok, they could have made the iHeartRadio, you know, all these things. If I worked at a radio station today, the first thing that I would do, and this is for talent, this is from promotions people, but especially talent, the first thing I would do is I would get to I would be friends with the top direct sellers in an authentic way. I would spend time with them. I would hang out with them. And from now on, when I go and I do my remotes and, you know, whether it's at the tire place or the car dealer, I would get to know every single person, every single client, every time. I would take a picture with them. I would get their phone number. I would treat it like dating. I would never ask them for anything, but I would start building relationships with all those people. And I would be tenacious about it. I would connect with them on LinkedIn. I would start thinking of myself as a business, not as a hired hand at this radio station. The next thing that I would do is I would take this thing, you know, that we all have here, this mobile television radio studio, and I would start firing this deal up. In fact, I have a bunch of these. I keep one in my car. I keep one in my duffel bag. They're a little expensive, but they probably make inexpensive versions of this like phone holder. And it allows you to turn your phone into a tripod mount. You can put it on a desk or whatever. And I would prop that thing in. And before my show or before my shift as the production director or the imaging director or the promotions director, I would prop that thing in there and I would start documenting the experience and sharing with the listeners what's going on. And I would offer it to the station people that manage the Facebook page and the social media for the station and say, hey, you're welcome to share this. But I'd put it on my pages, all my pages. And I would encourage them to share, my content, and you guys share it and use this, but keep creating cool stuff. And you talk with the guy, you know, the studio across the way. You're at a hot AC station. He's at the country station. What's in your lunch bag today, man? I brought, you know, Flamin' Hot Cheetos and whatever. What do you have for lunch? Off the air. I'd start talking to listeners off the air in between the songs. I'd start showing them what the station looks like. Little basic things to connect with them like in an authentic way over and over again. And I wouldn't look at how many people follow me, and I wouldn't look at how many people like and share. I would engage with the comments and let them know, hey, thanks for checking this out. What do you want to see next time? That sort of stuff. But you got to like tune out anything where they're like, negative comments.
Oh, well,
kill them with kindness. Kill them with kindness.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And it takes a pretty thick skin to do that. And it's one of the things that I've had to learn, but also I preach on it as well. If you've got somebody who's bashing you, it's a sales tactic to go in there and try and win them over to your side. Okay. You consider it a challenge. You know, when we started Rich's show, I'm kind of co-hosting it with him as well as producing it. In the beginning, everybody was like, why is Jim talking so much? Why is he, what does he know about the music business? And I'm going, well, I was in music radio for a long time. I've kind of been in the music business in some capacity, in a radio capacity. But anyway, I said, look, I get it. Yeah, I've listened back to the shows. We're only on episode 5 Okay. Part of the process is figuring out our roles on the show, which any good show is going to do. And yeah, I'm going to start pulling back. You're right. I did talk too much. And I'm going to start, giving Rich more of the spotlight. It's his show. And, thanks for checking it out. Make sure you tell your friends to listen. We're only going to get better from here. And that's how I handled it. And those guys are like, I took the wind out of their sails. And they were like, okay.
Yeah. Oh, he took it. Let's be real. A lot of us got into this because we wanted whatever came with it. And you have the skills. If you're in this business, you have the skills to handle the comments. You've seen that. Like sometimes it's personal, like it's at a remote at a car dealership. And usually it's mostly kindness, but sometimes you get the weirdos, and sometimes you get people that need special attention because they're affected by other things, whether it's their personal life or, a handicap or whatever. And you have to have some compassion with your audience a little bit. And that doesn't stop online. So if I were on the air and I had a job, I would do those things now and do them often. And you got to do them for like 30 days. Then start to record and document other things that are happening at the radio station. For sure, take a version of the show and put it out there and make it available as a podcast. But take some time before and after to set it up and talk about, hey, here's what happened on Wednesday. I had an argument with my co-host Jeff, but we went in the studio and then this is what happened. And afterwards we kissed and we made up and I took him out to lunch. And, it's not always easy being partners on the air. You got to work through it. People are going to get value from that. They're going to get entertained by that. They're going to connect with you in a way that you really are not going to be able to believe until it happens. And you just got to keep doing that over and over again. The more you do that, the better you're going to be at social media, and the more that the station and the audience are going to start to go, oh, wow, you're doing something that we need to do more of. And other people at the station are going to want to do it. And the station, exactly. Because the majority of these stations don't have a clue. No matter what they say, no matter what they tell you at the meeting or in the corporate memo or whatever, they really don't have a clue what to do with social media. They don't understand it. They don't know how to guide the talent to do it better. And those are just some basic things. The other thing that you could do that's really huge is just go find some people that are killing it on the internet. Maybe a guy like Gary Vaynerchuk or somebody else that's in a completely different space, and see what they're doing as it applies to their industry and see how you can adapt it for this industry. And at the end of the day, most of it is just sharing your life. It reminds me of, did you ever see that one video of the guy that was doing a teleconference working from home and his kid came in, his little baby came in the back door, and he didn't, if we could do that over again, like if I still had a toddler, my youngest is going to be 8 this week, but if they came in, I would be like, hey, come on in, sit on my lap. It's just life.
It's real, man. Authenticity matters. Real. Yeah, authenticity does matter.
And your radio show is pretty contrived and pretty fake and pretty tight and all that stuff. But this is an opportunity to let some of that real in the door with that audience. They will never forget you. I promise you. Right. It's one of the reasons why one of the biggest guys in Chicago is Steve Dahl. Over the years on the radio, he treated, and that's why people like Howard, they got so personal on the radio, whether it was contrived or real or whatever, the audience attached with them and they were like, oh, I remember when your kid was born and all that stuff. Well, in 8 seconds between that Taylor Swift song, you may not have the chance to share anything about your family and it may not be appropriate, but off the air, you really have that opportunity. And there's a woman who's on the news. I can't think of her name off the top of my head. She's in the South someplace. She props her cell phone up in her car and she does these videos where she opens up products and stuff. Anybody who's out there that's in media, radio, television, find her and watch what she does. I'm not telling you should do what she's doing. I'm just saying you should find a way to be you as well as she's found a way to be her. And you could see her shine through those videos so well.
I think on the air, a lot of people in the radio business have certainly lived or brought an element of their life on the air. Another aspect, it might be fishing, and you talk about how you go fishing. Then why not document your fishing trips? Start with those kinds of things. If you have a producer on the show, like what you're talking about, in between the breaks, record what's going on. All the phone interactions and how things are being done and all that behind the scenes stuff. And it's the same thing I tell, Rich, when you're getting ready to go on stage, Document the process. Show me how you warm up. I want to see what it looks like walking down the hallway when they call you to the stage and you're about to go on. You know, that stuff will go through the roof. And it always has.
And it may not, like the first time you do it, because it's sort of like doing it, and radio people can relate to this. Like, imagine when you went from doing a music-intensive show to a little bit more chatter, and then you wanted to take phone calls, and nobody called. And you're like, oh, man, nobody's calling. Well, they're not used to taking phone calls. The best thing to get phone calls on the air is to put a phone call on the air. Then people hear it, and they're like, oh, they're taking calls. Cool.
You're training them.
That's going to happen in your social media, too. It's going to be, at first, it might be like, oh.
I remember, you remember like the feedback and the comments on any social media post, or even, you know, if we get comments here, is kind of like what Opie and Anthony used to do. They kind of led the way with something called instant feedback. And people were able to message them while the show was going on in hopes that, you know, Anthony would say their name and what they said. So they would try and come up with the funniest thing they could possibly do. It's training people. We did that with Jack FM, right? When we started Jack FM here in Nashville, we started putting phone calls on the air of people having fun playing with the character of Jack. And we could actually steer the narrative by putting certain phone calls on the air. If we wanted to get people to, you know, say the individual letters of Jack, we would manufacture some of the phone calls, but generally a lot of the time they were real, they were legit. And it's amazing the stuff you'd start to get, because people would start, oh, okay, I get it now. I see it, you know. But
think about the radio predecessors, you know, like Wolfman Jack, for example. You know, go back and anybody out there watch American Graffiti if you've never watched it. I mean, there's not enough of him in there for my taste, but imagine you're sitting in that room and you have no real way to interact with your audience. And imagine if you could like go in it like Biff Tannen in the Time Machine and deliver the iPhone and social media to those people. To those old school radio people, and you showed them how they could interact with the audience, they would flip out. They'd be like, oh my gosh. Like, and then I could take the audience with me. All I got to do is get them, and I could get their phone number, or I could get their you know, username or whatever, get them to follow me. And now you're like the Verizon guy. Remember those commercials before the Verizon guy went to Sprint, where he'd have all the people behind him? Now you, as the radio person, have all those people behind you. Now try and renegotiate your morning show contract when you have all those people behind you. And then you're talking to the competitor across the street. Or you're considering breaking away totally because you've made friends with all the advertisers, you're buddies with the number 1 and number 2 sellers at the radio station, and you're all really sick and tired of the corporate BS. Now what? That's when you got some power.
But a lot of people are fearful. So what I'll leave you is with this. People that are listening, if you're radio people, I'm not bagging on you. Okay, what we're trying to do is show you that there is life after radio, or a transitionary period going into something else, doing what it is that you love on the radio. If it's for another radio station or something happens to you, God forbid, you know, set yourself up for that inevitability that may happen, okay? And a lot of the ideas that Matt just gave you in the last 10 minutes are awesome ideas. Really, really, really good ideas. So tremendous amount of value, Matt. Thanks for bringing the fire today. How can people find and follow you?
Best way, simplest way is to go to mattonair.com. There's 2 T's in that. And some of these things I write about or do a video about from time to time. And it's really just like you said, it's for encouragement. It may not always come off that way from me, because sometimes it feels like you got to be rattled to get out of that. You know, I don't know how many of you have seen The Matrix, but when you had the thing pulled out of your head and you're no longer in there, you could see it over there and you're like, hey, you guys, it's not so bad. It's scary, but you don't have to do all this stuff. Do one thing at a time, kind of ease your way into it. But if you don't start packing that parachute now, you cannot be surprised later when they go under, and you know it's coming. They've all gone, 2 of the 3 of the big guys have gone bankrupt, and they keep doing the same stuff over and over again. Meanwhile, go on social media and look at all these people that have a video camera in front of them and a microphone that have never been on the radio, they've never been on TV, and they're eating our lunch. I saw Gary Vee did a replay video today on Facebook. It had like 4,700 people streaming at once. Clay Travis, who's our morning guy on WCKG based out of Nashville, great social media oriented guy, had like 400 people watching,
right,
which is still pretty good, by the way.
Yeah, it is very good.
But think about it. The guy who's not on X amount of stations nationwide had more people watching him. So here's the good news. Everybody that's in the business, you already have these skills and this ability and this talent and this expertise that you could deploy in those other arenas. You just got to give it a little bit of a shot and figure out how to do it.
And you got to have consistency and understand it's going to take time. Okay.
Just like being on the radio,
right,
which you know how to do.
Right. And one of the things that I talk about with my podcasting clients, a lot of business owners, what is the objective of this podcast? What are we trying to do? Well, we want to get more clients. Okay. Who are they? We identify that. Who's going to be our audience? Now we got to speak to that audience and attract them into the beehive and the honeypot and start, building that brand. But I've got, unless you're not going to do this in 3 to 6 months, unless you're truly coming out with amazing content. The first 3 to 6 months are getting your sea legs. And a lot of radio people, you don't have to worry about that. You've already got your sea legs. Your acceleration to some sort of level of success is pretty decent compared to the layman. Okay. So yeah, take that into consideration, whether it's coaching other podcasts, which I think there's a tremendous hole right there that a lot of people can, myself, I'm doing it. I don't have the production chops I have the production chops. I don't have the show producing chops that a lot of people that have lived on a morning show or have done an afternoon drive show or a midday show have. I've been on the air in Connecticut. That's about it. I got a taste of it. I wasn't a fan. I'd rather do talk radio. And that's where I really started doing well in, as far as an on-air component. Mostly my situation was behind the mic in the production studio doing commercials and voiceover and imaging and stuff like that. But being surrounded by talk radio allowed me to say, well, if I want my own show, like the one I'm doing, hey, I can have at it. Okay. Anybody can have their own radio show these days. And it's being proven, because that's all this is a radio show, a podcast. It's got to be entertaining. Yes, it's got to be engaging and compelling. And educational, all those things. If you can do that, crap. People are doing that, unboxing products on YouTube. And kids will,
Ryan's doing it playing with toys, man.
Yeah. All right. My kids used to eat that stuff up. They would love to watch just their hands with a camera on it, unboxing toys. So
that's an important distinction, because, and I know you're trying to wrap up, but people, you don't have to redo what you already do on the internet. You could just do something where you incorporate the skills you have. Maybe you want to make children's videos on YouTube, or maybe you want to do some other thing. You could just kind of pivot and take what is your skill set and incorporate it in an area where there are no gatekeepers and there are no boundaries.
Just do
and it's
you.
limitless. You don't need your PD to say, yeah, do it. You don't need your GM to say, okay. You don't need any of that stuff.
Right.
And you have a lot of the skills and the talent to do that stuff. You could also just go the obvious route and just start hosting your own stuff and doing this stuff. But the sky is the limit once you kind of like open up and look for it.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I tell people, well, what should I do it about? What do you like? What do you enjoy doing? Get in front of a mic, put a camera up, and start talking about it. That's it. Start there.
Go do that now.
The mountain's in front of you, but you know how a mountain is climbed? By putting one foot in front of the other. That's it. Take it one day at a time. But man, thanks for being on with me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. If you guys want to reach out to Matt, I'll put his contact information, or at least his Twitter and Instagram handle down in the description. If you want, please follow along, rate the show. Either you hate it or you love it. I'm open to both, and that's fine. Just rate the show, comment on it, share it with your friends, follow us. That would be wonderful. My name is Jim McCarthy with JimMcCarthyVoiceovers.com. Thanks for hanging in with us. And once again, thanks, Matt, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
This is the JMVO Weekly Primer. Please subscribe, rate, and comment via JimMcCarthyVoiceovers.com /podcast.